Minnesota in probably 20 years.
Bring gas. Welcome to Flagrant Howls, a Minnesota Timberwolves lifestyle podcast.
The sound you hear are crickets chirping as the Timberwolves trade deadline activity comes to an unceremonious halt. Whatever phone calls they were making, whatever attempt they were making to trade the injured Julius Randle came up short. No trades for the Timberwolves at the deadline, confirmed by our guy Dane Moore, by the way. We got Kyle Teige, we got sports dad Judd, executive producer Dex. Phil, this is your favorite Timberwolves lifestyle podcast. And before we dissect an actionless trade deadline, let's first walk across the street from Target Center to Kieran's here, Dex, if we could.
The wind just might blow you from the exit doors of Target Center straight into Kieran's right now in the Twin Cities. I mean, you just will go right in there. It'll be nice. You won't even have to take a step. You'll just be right there at a bar stool. You can talk about if the Wolves made a massive mistake or not, or try to explain to me what the second apron is. I'd love to have that over a beer with a conversation at Kieran's. So go to Kieran's, just steps away from Target Field. Great pub. Great pub food, great taps, a lot of game day specials. Kieran's Irish Pub, just steps away from the Target Center.
All right, boys. Kyle, we'll start with you. No trades at the deadline. Your thoughts?
People will just be mad today
because
there are just people who prefer the transactions over the actual games. So if you're mad today, I get it. I think the most important transaction is going to be announced here relatively soon, probably tomorrow or Monday, and that will affect a lot of other dominoes. I'm okay with it because I don't think I was going to be like amped if it was Josh Minott for a second round pick. Obviously the Wolves could use any asset they could get, but outside of the Julius thing, what were they going to do, right? Like I had always thought Nikhil, they might sniff around on him because if Jalen Clark is playing exceptional right now. He leads, I think, the young pups kind of in like Finch's trust. That's a whole other conversation, but he's getting 20 minutes a game and he's playing incredible defense. They're like, well, maybe he's the Nikhil replacement. And if you don't think you're going to keep Nikhil, I would actually say, thinking of this on the fly, Nikhil not getting traded, despite only making $4 million, what can you really get for him? Might be a sign that they're going to keep him. And like that might be like a key to like, hey, you know what? They didn't do the Julius thing today. How do you trade a guy that has one groin? I don't know how many groins you have, but
is it two technically, or is the groin like one upper regional area?
Yeah, it's one area. It's one groin, but like you can strain the right side or the left side.
So it's not like a right groin strain. It's a groin strain.
I think Dex is right.
Right side of your groin.
Exactly.
Giggity.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm not a doctor, but
I just think again, the Julius thing, people want him to trade. It's important to know now that does not mean, and I think Dane and I should take some blame for this, but it doesn't just mean now that Nas and Nikhil are gone.
That's what I saw on the Dane Moore spreadsheet says in all block letters, the Wolves are screwed if this trade doesn't happen.
They can and very much maybe will either trade him on draft night, which is still in the current fiscal year for the NBA, or I think maybe it was Judd or Doogie the other day was like, maybe there's an agreement. Judd, you had this hot take. Like maybe they've already agreed that he's going to opt out. And I know that sounds crazy to people because like he's not that good. He's probably better than we think. Who's going to pay him that much money? I don't know, man. Like I watched Luka Doncic get traded for parts. Like anything can happen in this league and someone will pay him. So it's a sad day. No one's going to be happy. Their acquisitions will be Dante and Julius after the All-Star break when they both come back from injuries. But to me, it's all about how are you going to allocate minutes moving forward, whether or not you get new guys on the roster and get rid of old guys. Who is going to play in the 8-man, 9-man rotation moving forward? And I think now a lot of it turns to like Chris Finch, like kind of under the microscope of how are you going to set your rotation now for a team that this is it. You don't have to acclimate new guys into the roster. You have all the same guys. How are you going to allocate minutes for the final 30 games?
Real quick, so Kyle's going to hang for like 15, 20 minutes. I know you're going to jump into a Dane Moore podcast live stream. Go if you're not already subscribed to the Dane Moore NBA podcast YouTube channel, go do that. So you'll get plenty of Kyle today. But we will, once you leave, I think we'll get more into the weeds of they didn't trade Julius Randle. What do they do now with Julius Randle going forward? And there's 3 or 4 scenarios in play, all of them ranging from like very good for the Wolves or potentially very bad, could have domino effects on Nikhil, Naz Reid. There are, but just to like broadly let the audience know, the fact that Julius Randle is on the team at as we record this, 2:07 Central Time, 7 minutes after the trade deadline, does not mean that Naz Reid is for sure gone. It does not mean that Nickeil Alexander is for sure gone. There are still like 3 or 4 things that could be done here between now and the league year on like July 1st. But for this year, I'm with you, man. Like, and you've been banging the drum for weeks and weeks now. Be real about who you are as a team. And if the Western Conference and the activity didn't slap you upside the head as a franchise and tell you exactly where you're at, you're a good team. You've got one of the 12 to 15 best players in the world in Anthony Edwards. A lot of intriguing pieces. The Wolves have a lot of wins against above 500 teams. They can compete with anyone on any given night. But look at the West. The Thunder are getting Chet Holmgren back, I think, like this weekend. Or he's coming back. He just announced that he's coming back from injury. He's been out since November. The Lakers just added Luka and Mark Williams. The Warriors added Jimmy Butler. The Spurs added De'Aaron Fox and won last night. The Mavericks are still a short-term problem. The Grizzlies, who, by the way, according to Bob Myers on ESPN 10 minutes ago, tried to land Kevin Durant. Even without Kevin Durant, they're sitting here as the highest-scoring team in the Western Conference. So it's like, what is the expectation in the short term? I would say show some fight. Maybe you can still win a playoff series, but show some fight. Get Anthony Edwards maybe another, battle-tested playoff run to the second round if possible. And then starting immediately when you get bounced from the play-in or the playoff, look at this 3 to 5 year window of Anthony Edwards emerging into his prime and be dead serious about how you're molding this thing to crescendo into a really tough Western Conference gauntlet.
I'm disappointed, of course, because it's more fun when trades come down, right? And if the bigger the trade, the better. But the reality is what we're sitting here talking about and what the Wolves are facing today is why they traded Cat. Like this was the start of, somebody decided, probably a combination of Conley and Finch, but they decided that what they saw in the Western Conference Finals wasn't good enough to push them through to the finals. And so they said, we don't want to be stuck in a situation where we are basically in perpetuity in the second apron, right? So they're trying to get out of it. But you can't do that in, 6 months. Like, it takes work here. So I think the reality is if you're a Wolves fan, it's a bit of a wake-up call, because the people that run the team made a decision about where things stand, and now this is the way to get out of it. But it doesn't come quickly. You know what? This is very comparable to the Vikings the last few years in free agency, right? Like, it's the same thing. The Vikings couldn't sign guys. Why couldn't they? Why can't you go get a guard for Kirk? Well, you can't afford to, because Kirk eats up so much cap space. So it's unfortunate because it's not fun, but it's the reality of the decision being made that Karl Anthony Towns paired with Ant wasn't going to get you a championship, and they need to find the guy to pair with Ant who can.
By the way, if they had kept Cat, for instance, I think the debate is, well, they would be ascending. It's a linear progression. They would just be getting better from where they were last year. Despite the fact that Mike Conley literally shoots 23% in the fourth quarter, and Rudy Gobert's taking a step back. And we've had that fight and in discussion all year. But going into the summer, if you had kept Cat and you come up short, maybe you don't even make it as far as the Western Conference Finals. You'd go into a summer in which obviously you don't have Dante DiVincenzo because you wouldn't have traded for him. You'd be losing Naz Reid because you would be even as far into the second apron as you are right now. You'd be even further in because Cat, I think it's isn't like a $10 or $12 million. They actually cleared like $12 million by acquiring Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And so no DDV, no Naz Reid, no Nickeil Alexander-Walker, unless you were to trade Cat this summer. So you were facing this either way. And I'm just, I'm in wait and see mode until, I know I kind of said like trade deadline, but there really are other levers to pull between now and the summer. Presuming that Tim Connolly doesn't pull his own lever and opt out, because he also has an opt out clause this summer.
His own ripcord. Yeah. See you later, guys.
So, anyways, Kyle, do you think what is their window right now? Like, what is this franchise?
This is just not the best time for this, because I find myself I'm rewatching the Bulls game, and I think the team just is loaded with talent. I think there's guys that fans tuning into this don't like. I think we pretty much know who those are. I think there's players that should get more run. Like, Phil, we did the thing. Rob should start over Mike. I know Mike might be listening, by the way, because he said he listens to all media. So Minnesota Mike, we appreciate you. But at this point, like, I think it would just make more sense to lean in a little bit more to Jalen Clark and Rob and take some of those bumps.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Dane did this, and I yelled at him privately. And Phil, you guys are like, I don't look at the standings now and just it's very Minnesota sports sometimes to be like, wow, 14 other teams in the West got better. Because it's like, I look at it and they're 7 seed, and behind them is Phoenix, who Ramona Shelburne reported their locker room is toxic. The Kings, their best blue chip player is Malik Monk. The Warriors, have fun with that. Like, that, I'm sure, is a powder keg that won't explode with Draymond Green.
Be like wild to watch.
So it's like kind of like the Wolves, the Nuggets, the Lakers, and the Clippers trying to fight for that 4, 5, 6. They're a half game back at the 6 seed. They've dropped some just embarrassing games this week against Washington and Sacramento. But I also kind of think that if you just play the right guys, half of the transactions, I think Bobby Marks, half of the transactions that blew up your phone today were teams shedding salary to get under the second apron or an apron to get a tax payment. Like, because if you go look, the Wolves have the second highest projected tax payment. I think it's like $85 million.
Yeah.
So when you see what the Cavs are doing, yes, they got a good player in DeAndre Hunter. They also shed salary. Like, some of these teams are just trying to get that $15, $16 million tax check that comes out at the end of June. So the Wolves aren't in that spot. It's probably good that the ownership is willing to pay this one thing. But I don't know, man. I think if Chris Finch absorbs and assumes, like, hey, this is who I got, I need to tweak some things for the final 30 games. Who did you want to get on the team? Like, did you want to go get Lonzo Ball? Because he's going to play over Rob. And I know everyone's playing over Rob right now, and I don't agree. But, like, what did you want to do? Did you want to go get another guard and play him over Jalen? Like, just play the young guys. Like, just let them start to figure it out a little bit over these 30 games, because they've shown you now they deserve to play. Jalen Clark is one of the 3 or 4 best defenders on the team. And Rob is the most creative guy they have with the ball outside of Ant. So I'm not that bummed that it wasn't like Luka Garza for a 6th-round pick in the NFL draft. Like, whatever. You didn't get a backup
game
center.
last night. Rough game last night for our guy Garza.
Dude, did they score like
tough.
23 points in the 6.5 minutes he was on the
Straight. I didn't. The guy that did it against
so
him,
bad.
who used to be drafted, I think, by Indiana, was like one of the worst picks ever, or by Phoenix and then traded Indiana. But yeah, the Smith kid just cooked Garza. So I don't know. It's
crazy.
It sucks. I want to know about the ownership thing first, but I'm really just now, let's tighten the screws. Let's figure out who deserves to play, because everyone keeps saying they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to do anything. Like, Phil, are you 6-3 Rockets Timberwolves in mid-April?
Yeah.
Are you just saying the Rockets are winning in 5?
To make my stance clear, I actually still think there's a world in which they could win 2 playoff series and get to the Western Conference Finals. If you get playoff Anthony Edwards, if you get Dante DiVincenzo back, if Julius Randle comes back from his adductor strain, he's been a positive value player more often than not this season. So, like, there is a world in which they could get to the Western Conference Finals, 100%. But then beyond wherever they go this year, there's a big discussion about, okay, what are you got to get Nas back. You got, like, Nas Reed has to be a 4-year, $100 million guy, in my opinion. Like, you have to figure out what is your nucleus for the next 3 years. And I think fans and myself were hoping that there'd be a little more clarity on that with a Julius Randle trade. Because now it's like, okay, now you're just kind of like kicking that can down the road, maybe at the expense of other core pieces. But I agree with you. In the meantime, 20 minutes of Jalen Clark, that tells you something about the future. If we get 15 minutes of Rob Dillingham, like, that's fun to watch. And so if they wind up, if the gap year or if this is like their J term or something where, all right, I know we're taking a breather from how far we went last year. But if they wind up as like the 6th seed and they beat the Rockets, to your point, and they get to the second round, and that's how their season ends, is that really as gigantic? And by the way, through that process, they've gotten out of the second apron once they kind of figure out exactly what they're doing with Julius. They will be out of the second apron, by the way. The Cat trade assured they will be out of the second apron if they choose to be this summer. That gives them flexibility to then, in the future, say, oh, now we can compound players and make trades again. Like that trade the Warriors made. Let's trade this guy and this guy for Jimmy Butler. Well, you can't do that if you're the Timberwolves right now because you're in the second apron. So if you're a 6 seed and you win a playoff series and you clear flexibility, I don't think that's a failed season based on the window you have with Anthony Edwards long term. That's my take.
Can I say this? I think now that we basically know who's going to be here for the rest of the season, I think the final 31 games are largely a referendum on Chris Finch. I want to see how he operates now. Like we don't look. He's done really well, and I think I think he's got a lot of attributes that you want in a coach. But we've been complaining all season long about rotations at times, about who's playing, about who's not playing. And now that you know your identity, like no one's going to come in on a white horse and save the day, which is not entirely surprising. I think that
Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to be on a white horse.
Exactly. But that's
other than him.
But that's the point. But that's the point. You're right. Like that's the question. Finchie loves his vets, and I get that. But some of those vets aren't playing well. And some of the kids, yes, they're going to have rough moments. They're going to have rough games. But I really think, Kyle, that the last 31 games is going to help us really judge Chris Finch here, because there do have to be adjustments. There do have to be changes and acceptance of what you have. This isn't last year's team.
And by the time Julius Randle comes back, like here's a great example of everything you just said. When Julius Randle comes back, so this is like after the All-Star break, Tim Conley will already know if he's going to be here next season or not. Like I'm just kind of telling you what it is. Like he'll know already because he's going to know who the ownership group is. And if it goes one way, I think he's out. And I think if it goes the other way, I think he maybe immediately signs a lucrative extension. And if that's the case, and he's like, this is my team, I'm here for the long haul, I'm going to build this thing around Ant, I wonder if Julius starts when he comes back. Because that might be like, Tim might be like, I'm digging my fingers into this a little bit more. This is a referendum on Finch. Finch, if you want to stay here, like, have you seen what Nas has done since he's been promoted to starter? I mean, that whole thing just looks so much better. And you're trying to flirt with him a little bit because you do Nas Reed would love to stay here. Ownership is well aware. I think new ownership would sign him right away, 4 years, $100 million plus. But he also wants to start. Like, he deserves to start. So if Julius comes back after the All-Star break and Finch says, hey, listen, we got a good thing going here. Nas is going to stay at the 4. Julius, you're going to be our 6th man. You're going to run a second unit. That'll be a really interesting domino that I think could really happen, even though I understand Finch does love his vets. It will change 6 or 3 weeks from now because you're going to have this ownership thing, which I know people are so tired of, but I think it held up a lot of stuff. I think it's held up so many decisions for this roster for this season because no one really knows who to report to.
Hey, quick, one last question for Kyle here, and then we'll say goodbye to Kyle, and then we're going to get into now that Julius is here past the trade deadline, what are the scenarios, deep dive discussion. But one thing that they are trying to figure out short and long term is who is Ant's running mate, quote unquote, which is kind of a nebulous, like we love this, the Batman Robin. It's hard to quantify. It's kind of, it when you see it in the NBA. It's Julius right now, just like technically it was Cat, but Julius aside, give me your quick off the top of your head power rankings on guys who are currently on the team. So Nas, DiVincenzo, Dillingham, in the next 2 to 3 years, your power rankings of who is most likely to be Ant's main running mate, second leading scorer on the team, a guy who could pop off for 15 points in the fourth quarter if needed.
I think it's Nas. But I also a lot of my friends have said this to me in the last 24 hours. How do the Wolves find a second star? And again, I attend the Rob Dillingham Muse meetings. Like, I think Rob is awesome. But you want like reckless speculation Thursday?
Here, I'll give you a cover.
Is there a chance Anthony Edwards is the best player on the Summer Olympics team in 2026 when the Summer Olympics? Or is it 2026 the Summer Olympics or 2028?
It would be 2028.
Okay, is there a chance that as those teams start to form, that Ant could be the best guy in it?
On the U.S., yeah, I'm taking away all the European guy. On the U.S. team,
Luka,
he should
Shea,
be one of the
Jokic,
2 or 3.
International.
Wemby, yeah.
Like, do you think there's a world down the road a year or two from now where, I mean, we just saw like this Luka thing, right? Explode, or like the De'Aaron Fox thing just overnight. Like, are you saying that the Wolves wouldn't have an opportunity down the road if players continue to develop to do like Nas and Rob for Paulo Banchero?
Totally. As long as they're not in the second apron. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's so much fluidity. Like, if the league taught you anything this week, it's that some of these guys go for, De'Aaron Fox went for 1 pick, right? And it does make the Rudy trade look really bad. But I mean, some of this stuff just happens. So I don't know. I understand some of the frustration, but I look at Denver and I'm like, who's their second guy? Like Jamal Murray, like he had his moments, but he's over the hill. The Clippers, like the Lakers are a different thing. They're like born on third base and like a trust fund kid. But I don't know. I'm just going to be pretty defiant that I think this team has maybe not a clear number 2 right now, but like how many rosters would you take in the West over them when you think of like how good Rob could be and how much the fans believe in him, and Jaden, his leap, and Nas is shooting, I think maybe
it's
the best 3-point percentage
since the beginning of January.
He's literally shooting better from three and on more volume than Carl did. And I love Carl. And then you have Dante, and like maybe Terrence Shannon Jr. is a dude. And like, I don't know. I think they have a lot of talent and a lot of pieces, and they just feel, to your point, they did the D'Lo thing because they had to do it at the deadline. Like that was the actual deadline to figure it out. Unfortunately, we're learning that the draft night might be the deadline to figure out this Julius Randle conundrum. But if Julius Randle is here long term, I think he's a good player. That would make me panic because I don't think that doesn't fit what I mean. Naz Reid, man, is probably the second best offensive player on the team right now, and that's awesome. And he should be here and get more money and get more minutes.
I think Naz Reid's in the running in terms of just guys currently on the team. I still stand so hard for Dante DiVincenzo as a guy that could be a 20 points per game scorer if given the right opportunity and volume. And I mean, Dillingham has the bag. It just depends on, can he get there as a passable defender? Can he get the minutes and all those things? He's 19, 20 years old. But so yeah, Wolves do nothing at the trade deadline, but there are bright days ahead when you have Anthony Edwards as your star player. Kyle, any final words of wisdom from you on this trade deadline Thursday?
It's apples and hand grenades, but I will never forget the overall feeling of the fan base after the Wolves lost to the Phoenix Suns in Game 82 last season. It's all over. This was all for nothing. There is no hope. And they swept the Suns. So I'm pretty optimistic because I think this team has a lot of talent, and I think for a 4-year, I mean, imagine being at Costco in line for 4 years and you're just trying to get shrimp, right? Like, we will finally find out tomorrow who gets to own the shrimp, or maybe Monday. But the ownership thing, once that's done, let's never talk about it again, and then let's figure out who is in charge of making basketball decisions long term, and let those people make basketball decisions.
Amen.
Depends on, of course, who gets the team. Because we might have to talk about it again if Glenn keeps the team. So.
All right. We'll see. We'll see. This could be like a 4:45 p.m. Friday news drop. I think they should do it when these big blockbusters, like the Cat trade happened at 10 p.m. The Luka trade happened at like midnight. Let's
3 a.m.
Let's drop the press release.
Email at 3 a.m.
Yeah, 3 o'clock in the morning on Super Bowl Sunday. All right, Kyle. You can catch more of Kyle and his takes about the trade deadline and life and spreadsheets on the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We'll see you next week, buddy.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good one.
We're going to do a deeper dive into the Julius Randle scenarios here, boys, after we shout out Brixworth in the North Loop. In fact, I think next, I got to check my calendar here, but I'm going to Brixworth next Tuesday with a little group here. I think Tuesday or Wednesday. So if you see old Macadac in there bellied up with some Cool Ranch Dorito dry rub wings and maybe one of those signature Naz Reid hazy IPAs, come on up and we can talk some hoops. Brixworth in the North Loop, just steps away from Target Center. Great place to pre and or post game or for away games. Just belly on up. Super close, like I said, to Target Center. And you can even park over there too. It's cheaper. You could walk. Pretty decent weather here it's a little cold and windy, but the sun is shining at least. So, you could get your tan while you're walking over from Brixworth to Target Center. In the summertime, great sprawling patio. One of the best places in the North Loop for a beverage and a snack. That's Brixworth. Also, Element Hotel, which is just kind of across the street from Brixworth. Element Hotel is a Marriott Bonvoy property for points purposes. This is the place to stay if you're looking for convenient walking and or light railing to the arenas, the stadiums in Minneapolis, some of the best restaurants and bars in the North Loop. Element Hotel, bright natural lighting throughout the hotel rooms, city views. Just a fantastic place to spend a night or a weekend, or if you're coming in from out of town, maybe you're an out-of-town Wolves fan, you can get a 15% room rate discount when you go to scorenorth.com/element. That's a 15% room rate discount, scorenorth.com/element. So Kyle's right. People are going to be pretty pissed that the Wolves did nothing. Do you guys think that the the groin strain or the adductor strain. I wonder if they had something lined up. But if you're a team and you're like, well, like there are some Miami rumors out there and maybe even Detroit for a while. But if you're one of those teams, you're like, well, he's not even going to be reevaluated for 2 or 3 more weeks. And now we're like into March and he might be a rental. I just wonder how much that injury derailed whatever they may or may not have had planned at the deadline today.
Yeah, I think it probably did. But I also don't know if they were like sold on 100% selling on Julius Randle either. I mean, you got to remember going into the injury, we touched on it a little bit on this episode, but he was starting to play a lot better. And I don't know if it was just playing a lot better meant, well, even better reason to trade him right now because he's starting to fit in. Because now that he's been gone, there's been times where it's still been really clunky without him. So I don't think the injury like completely derailed things. I'm sure some contingency plans or plans that maybe were in place got thrown out, but I think they still would have likely kept Julius Randle. They were so restricted on what they could do going into this deadline that I don't think the injury necessarily stopped them from making like a big blockbuster trade.
I think what you're going to talk about with this whole process thing, I think that's the plan. Like, it's disappointing. I don't know if the fans are going to be mad. I think, it's disappointing because it's like, well, the team's pretty good and, what's your move, right? And to the Wolves' credit, at times we become accustomed, certainly in recent years, to some substantial moves being made. But that being said, I would love to know the night that they made the Cat trade. Wouldn't you love to know what the blueprint plan was? Like if there was a blueprint plan, because I mean, you just don't trade Cat because it's like, you know what? I woke up this morning and I've decided to trade Carl. You trade Carl as part of this is what we can and can't do. And we all said, okay, you went to the Western Conference Finals. What's your next act? I don't know. Tim Connolly thinks that way. So I would love to know what the actual plan was, and what you're about to talk about, Phil, I think might get more towards what that plan was as opposed to our desire for a trade immediately by 2:00 today Central.
Yeah. So he is on the team. If you were to have traded, this is the problem. Long term, the Wolves need to get out of the second apron as soon as possible. Forget about the luxury tax and the monetary penalties that ownership pays.
Yep.
A lot of these trades that you saw today, let's trade Wiggins and Kyle Anderson, or yesterday, for instance, Wiggins and Kyle Anderson and somebody else, and put those 3 salaries together to get Jimmy Butler. You can't aggregate salaries as one of the many penalties to get a player like that. So like the way that it hamstrings you, you can't take on more money in a trade. You can't pick up a player in the buyout market. You can't use a mid-level exception to add players in the offseason. The second apron is for finished products where we don't need to make any more moves with our roster. And the 3 teams in the second apron this year, one of them is absolutely a finished product, the Celtics. They just won a championship. Stay in the second apron. You got one of the 3 best teams in the NBA. And then you have the Suns and the Wolves are the other 2 teams. The Wolves are in a better spot than the Suns because the Suns are aging, toxic locker room, and way underachieving compared to. But it is almost impossible to add to a second apron team. So priority 1 in the next few months is get out of the second apron.
And to explain this, though, because like for the Wolves, I could see fans saying, why did you get yourself in this mess? Like the Carl contract was done under the previous CBA. The CBA that kicked in on July 1st is far more restrictive and actually doesn't want these huge trades made. So the Wolves, in some ways, inherited the problem when the new CBA came in, because previously, yes, it could be the taxes have been there, but this, I think, is far more restrictive. And now to Declan's chagrin, we're talking about aprons, blah, blah, blah. So
yeah.
Like the Suns and the Wolves didn't necessarily say, let's be reckless as hell. Who cares? They did things that came back to bite them. And remember, the Carl contract was not done by Conley.
Yeah. Well, but also it's even less about, because I think the Carl contract was he's a super talented player. Like the market is a max contract. Bringing in Gobert and having
sure.
that contract that guaranteed that they were going to be a temporarily finished product in the second apron.
Sure.
And guess what? For all the people that lament the Gobert trade and that he even still exists in a Timberwolves uniform, they do not go to the Western Conference Finals without Rudy Gobert, period. No, of course, like Cat was a huge reason, and Ant, like there's probably 3 or 4 guys that you needed. But they had the number 1 defense in the NBA because he was the number 1, or he was Defensive Player of the Year. Call him a top 5 defender in the league. He was the anchor for that defense. So you don't go to you can like re-rack history and get rid of Rudy Gobert historically because it's a lot more fun to think about Cat and Naz Reid, right? Well, I got news for you. Cat and Naz Reid, as much as they be launching threes, that team's given up 123 points a night defensively. So, they leaned into defense. It got them so far. Then they kind of realized, yeah, that was fun for a couple years. We thought we had a 2-year window. The first year was kind of a wash. The second year we went far. So Julius is still on the team. What can happen now? Scenario 1, and Kyle touched on this, you could trade him on draft night. The NBA draft is like a week or 5 days, usually before the start of the league year. The draft this year is on June 25th. So you could trade him. You still have his rights. The opt-out deadline is not usually until like a few days after the draft and before free agency. So you still have his rights. You could swing a trade of some kind. So that's in play. Scenario 2, Julius could just straight up opt out of his contract. He could say, you know what? $30 million would be nice, but I actually think there's a market. This is my last chance as a 30-year-old or whatever, 30, 31. This is my last chance to sign a $100 million 3-year deal or something with somebody. And I'll even go play for a bad team. But I think I can get a bigger bag than 1 year, $30 million. So in that case, it kind of helps solve your problem. Julius Randle would opt out. Now, Naz Reid is going to opt out no matter what because he has a 1 year, $15 million player option, and he can get maybe $100 million over 4 years. But if Randle opts out, it puts the Wolves $60 million below the second apron. It puts them below the first apron. It fixes all of their current luxury tax and apron problems. And then you'd be able to sign Naz Reid for, and I'm estimating these contracts, kind of educated guesses, talking to people that are smarter about contracts than I am. Jade McDaniels is making $25 million ish per year, right? So Naz Reid, $25 million, maybe he gets a little more. I mean, he's red hot as a 3-point shooter right now. But let's call it $25 million a year, 4 years, $100 million. You could also sign Nickeil Alexander-Walker for $8, $9, $12 million a year is probably an educated guess. And you could use the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception of estimated $14 million a year on a player. So you say goodbye to Julius, you get out of the second apron, and you bring back Naz, Nickeil, and you get the $14 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception. To like, by the way, Klay Thompson, there's players you can get for $14 million. Klay Thompson was like a mid-level exception player. PJ Washington in Dallas, like a $14 million player. Tyus Jones was like a $2.5 million league minimum player.
Yeah,
so there are dudes out there for that mid-level exception. If Randle opts out, it clears the way for all these things to happen if you want to. All right? I think that's probably the best, cleanest scenario.
Sure.
But, he has 4.5 more months to make that decision however he sees fit. He has the control. Mm-hmm. Scenario 3, which gets a little more muddy and complicated. Julius Randle opts into his $30 million player option, and you trade him in the day or two leading up to the league year. So maybe he opts in. I think he can opt in before the draft. I'd have to see when that window opens. But then you have a deal lined up before the free agency league year starts in July, and it would probably have to be a team that can absorb the cap hit. Because if the problem with trading him, if he opts out, you clear the $30 million. You don't get anything for him, but you clear the $30 million. What you get is Naz Reid and room to re-sign those guys and stay under the second apron. If you trade him for a $30 million equal asset, then you'd have to make a tough decision. You might not be able to bring back Naz or Nickeil. So could you find a team with cap space? Maybe they give you something in return. Maybe it's, I don't know. Could you get a first round pick? I don't know. Probably not. But then that would allow you to stay below the second apron, re-sign Naz Reid. If you found a team to absorb the $30 million, you would then have room to potentially re-sign Nickeil Alexander-Walker too. But you're walking a tightrope of who are the interested trade partners? Is there something of value we could get in return? Would we have to take on a bad contract in return? And if that's the case, does that cost us Nickeil Alexander-Walker? Which you got Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark that could step in and maybe fill that sort of 3 and D role.
Is the key guy here.
Do we all agree that Naz Reid is the absolute priority of all these players?
Oh,
right?
yeah. God, yeah.
Number one.
Yeah.
And then there's scenario 4, which is Julius Randle opts into his player option, and there is no trade market for him. There's just unless you attach like that Pistons first round pick, which that I think that'd be kind of a disaster if you had to then cobble those 2 assets together just to ship him out of town. So if he opts into his player option and you can't find a trade partner, the Wolves, so they'd take on the $30 million for Julius. They'd still be, with Naz opting out, $30 million below the second apron. So they could re-sign Naz for like $25 million a year. But if you're Naz, you're like, this guy's still here.
Yeah,
I like him as a guy, but I want to play minutes, man. I want to start. And I got 4 other teams offering me $100 million here. So then that gets kind of muddy. And you got to figure out Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So there's a bunch of scenarios still, some better for the Wolves than others, by which you can navigate the Julius Randle situation, which is the way we talk about him, by the way, is as if he's like this. He's a good player, but he doesn't fit the age timeline, and he's not impactful enough to lock your team in or around the second apron. Yeah, so it just, it's
a
really
financial burden.
It's addition by subtraction that if you subtract him and that contract, you add Naz Reid in his prime, and you add potentially Nickeil Alexander-Walker and or a $14 million mid-level exception player in free agency. So
and this is why it's perfect. Kyle's right. When Julius comes back, Naz still starts. Like if he's coming off the bench, look, I think he would much prefer a multi-year contract for something equivalent to what he is making, as opposed to coming back here, coming off the bench on the last year of his contract, which, by the way, if I'm the Wolves or Julius, I have no interest in going through that. So I think the opting out thing, as I said a couple of days ago in my Wolves hottest take, I'm not sure the Wolves know exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a discussion. It just like Julius is not a bad player, but the reasons he was acquired are so obvious. And I know it sucks. And I know Cat, people now, especially in retrospect, love Cat. People who ripped Cat up and down love Cat. But the reality is this is all part of a process that they basically decided we've got a web here. And it's not going to win a championship, so we're going to have to untangle it a bit. And I feel bad because Wolves fans, to a large extent now, are sort of caught in the middle of this whole thing. And it's like, but this was going to be such a great year. And it's like, it might not be a great year. It might be a good year, but I just think that it would be so much simpler for all parties if Julius went and signed a great big contract with the Charlotte Hornets and just scored like a maniac there, made the All-Star game, and was on a team that won, 30 games or 25 games.
What? 30's given the Hornets. With Julius, maybe
he's
they
a perfect
have a chance
Hornet,
to get to 30.
He's perfect there, right?
He is, man. Yeah, somebody.
Hornet.
Who was the dude that the Lakers, the 7-footer that the Lakers traded for as kind of a big man replacement for Anthony Davis? They got him from the Hornets. Williams, right?
Mark Williams.
Williams, yep.
He's been ripped up and down all season long because he's lazy, I guess.
Because he doesn't play but he's, in terms of like offensive grabbing lobs in the dunker spot from Luka, he's going to be electric offensively in that role.
Yeah, that's true.
But I saw someone from like Hornets Twitter went viral saying, boy, I've seen way, way too many strong takes on Mark Williams. I know not that many people watch Hornets games, so you guys are all frauds.
That's exactly right.
So, yeah, it's going to be, I think everyone probably just needs to take a deep breath and let the next 5 to 6 months play out. There's a lot of really exciting young talent Dante DiVincenzo is going to come back at some point, maybe before the end of the season, to see how he blends in with some of this. But yeah, like all due respect, Mike Conley was one of the most pivotal pieces in Wolves history, because that's another guy that they don't unlock Gobert in the way that they did in some ways. They don't get the leadership without Mike Conley. And Julius, way too much of a punching bag that people are making him out to be. But the rest of the season, I need a little less Mike Conley, a little less Julius Randle, and would love to see what they have in some of these pieces. And test driving Naz Reid as a 30 minutes per game guy. He's averaging, in the 3 games he started, he's averaging like 32 minutes a game, 21 points, ridiculous efficiency offensively. You're test driving that to see if it's worth $100 million over 4 years in free agency.
Yeah,
that's the important thing.
If he has consecutive bad games, let's not say I got to pull back on that. Like that's the thing with Finch is you get some rope, but as soon as it's like that third quarter, you played a little bit, wasn't good, you're benched. Like that's the thing that has to stop. Like you need to find out, if nothing else. This is a chance, because the team's not bad, but this is a chance at exploratory, right? You can explore some things now. And if they continue to go to, well, Mike Conley has to play. I don't think that that's a very good reflection then on that Finch knows where this is going. Like if the mandate is you have to win now, I disagree with that. I think it's you got to find out. It's nice to win, but you got to find out now, because some of the vets that you're trying to play, quite frankly, it's not like they've been playing great.
Yeah, I think, but some of the vets you're referring to are Mike Conley. I mean, unless you're talking about Jade McDaniels has been awesome over the last month.
Oh, no, but I'm saying,
Nikhil.
But I'm saying Finch also pulls the plug on some of the young guys really quickly at times. And it's like, let that play out. Now on Clark, I will say this. You could tell why Finch loves him. That guy plays like he's been in the damn league for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Like everything he does is responsible. Like you can see why he lifts guys quickly. Okay. I'm just saying, I think this is a time maybe for a bit more patience, but like watching Clark last night, he totally understands his role and he looks comfortable. And he looks like he has absorbed everything. It's really impressive.
Yep. Definitely need to see more of him in the net. Because again, it's like you got to figure out what you have with some of these 21 to or 19 to like 26-year-olds, so you can be more confident this summer. So, anyways, there's your trade deadline recap episode, Crickets edition here on Flagrant Howls. Thanks to our guy Kyle Tigey, the sports dad Judd. Producer Declan, I'm Phil. We will have a Feedback Friday edition tomorrow on your favorite Timberwolves lifestyle podcast.